to Tallha Abdulrazaq, who is a writer and an academic specialising in the Middle East. Tallha, thank you for being with us tonight. What role did Ismail Haniyeh play in directing Hamas and Hamas's operations?
Ismail Haniyeh was the political leader, so I wouldn't say that he had much role to play in the day-to-day operations of the organization. And least of all, and in particular, he had very little role to play when it came to the military operations of Hamas, which was actually under the direction of Yahya Sinwar, who is in the Gaza Strip currently. So he's not someone who's kind of like an operational level guy. He's very much on the strategic level, and that's kind of where his expertise lay, in the political side of things.
Right, okay. So how do you foresee his absence influencing how Hamas operate from now then?
Well, it's actually his presence that influenced the trajectory that Hamas took kind of like post-2016, 2017, in the sense that prior to that, and under the leadership of Khalid Mish'al, Hamas as an organization was actually considerably more distant from Iran than it is today. Kind of like there was an internal power struggle, I should say, between certain factions and leadership within Hamas, and ultimately Ismail Haniyeh's faction won out, and that's where you saw an extreme pivot towards getting closer and closer towards Iran. Right. So his absence now is perhaps going to open the door to maybe other leadership hopefuls, perhaps even a return to Khalid Mish'al, and in the correct environment whereby perhaps other Arab powers step in and assist in Palestinian statehood and recognition and so on and so forth, we could see a reduction in Iran's influence in the organization.
Right, that's interesting. Ismail Haniyeh also played a very important role in ceasefire negotiations as well, didn't he? He was there, he was present. How do you see his absence now influencing those?
I mean, for anyone who is actually genuinely interested in achieving a ceasefire, then obviously this move is more or less a death blow to the negotiations as it currently stands. There's no way you can claim to want a negotiated settlement and then you go and whack one of the senior negotiators on the other side. It tells everyone exactly what your position is in the kind of the totalitarian aspect of it, either our way or the highway. And I think Israel has made that extremely clear.
So you feel that his absence then makes a ceasefire, I mean, you described it as a death blow.
Yeah, I don't think that there will be any ceasefire for the foreseeable future. I mean, militarily speaking, the Qassam brigades, while obviously depleted in terms of their ammunition and their manpower, they're still putting up a fight in Gaza. We're still seeing Israeli casualties and people wounded in action being taken back to Israel for treatment. So clearly they're not entirely diminished as the Israeli government would have us all believe.
Right.
But on the other side to that, it's not the case that they're going to just, for example, allow one of their senior leaders to be killed and then they just suddenly agree to a ceasefire. I don't see that happening anytime soon at all.
Okay, that's important, isn't it? Just further on that, Tallha, because we've long debated how realistic it is to defeat Hamas fully. That is Israel's intention. There have been voices from across the spectrum on this saying, Hamas is an idea as much as anything else, and that it is incredibly difficult to defeat that idea. Where does this moment and this moment sort of playing into an ultimate attempt to defeat Hamas sit in the grand scheme of that?
I mean, let me tell you something. Having spent considerable amount of time with Palestinians inside Palestine and outside Palestine, and having regularly discussed this issue with them, even Palestinians who are against Hamas are very much pro the idea of resistance. So even if Hamas is politically disdained or disliked by a particular segment of Palestinian society, when push comes to shove and it's Israel versus a Palestinian faction, not even necessarily Hamas, it could be any Palestinian faction, they'll close ranks around that. So to destroy Hamas in such an environment is nigh on impossible, because you cannot detach the popular support for the idea of resistance from the fact that Hamas is seen as the symbolic leader currently of this resistance. So you have to change the actual variables on the ground first before such a thing becomes possible. And I don't see Israel budging on that at all.
Right, and that helps us, I suppose, doesn't it? Understand Benjamin Netanyahu's comments, understand this week, perhaps, where they have targeted Hezbollah and Hamas leaders, and perhaps signalled, as you suggest, no intention to complete a ceasefire negotiation, that they see Hamas as an idea for which, there is support amongst, or at least there is support for resistance amongst Palestinians, as you say, Tallha, and therefore Israel will feel they should be in this for the long haul.
Well, I mean, there's a lot easier ways to take if one wants to reduce tensions across Palestine. And that's obviously, for example, the recognition of the 1968 borders, the right of return, an increase in the human rights and the reduction of apartheid policies and so on and so forth. These are the key sticking points. So it doesn't matter whether it's Hamas or any other group. These will always be the key sticking points for the Palestinians. If you just say, theoretically speaking, you manage to kill every last Hamas leader, another group will take their place. It's not just a case of this being an idea. It's a kind of a level of spirit.
Right.
Where people do not accept being under occupation, and that will continue so long as there's an injustice.
And some may say, Tallha, that sort of train of thought blames Israel for violence against them.
Naturally, of course. I mean, if someone's bombing you, you're going to blame the person bombing you. That's a totally
or attempts to justify
rational and sane thing.
There's an attempt there perhaps to justify the violence against them.
What do you mean? Sorry.
There's an attempt in that train of thoughts, or some may interpret it, shall we say? This is not something I'm accusing you of, Tallha, just to be clear.
Of course, thanks.
Yeah, but just to be clear on that. But some would interpret that as saying, well, that is a justification for example, what happened on the 7th of October.
Well, the way the Palestinians see it, and I've heard this very frequently, is that this war started long before the 7th of October. So the precursor events that led to the 7th of October are what we should be focusing on. I take the view personally that each kind of epoch within the wider struggle has to be assessed on its own terms, bearing in mind the history of the conflict. We can't simply detach, for example, 7th of October and say, well, prior to 7th of October 2023, nothing really happened. It was only until then that Israel kind of got violent. That's, verifiably not the case.
Okay.
And it goes against the factual record.
Okay. Tallha, thank you very much. Appreciate your insight. Tallha Abdulrazaq there, giving us, if nothing else, just context, I suppose, of the complexity of this, and also contextualising, I suppose, how Benjamin Netanyahu feels and what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying there, which is that they are in this for the long haul, that there is something much, much deeper here than the sort of structures that we, and the characters, something deeper than the characters, I suppose, that are leading these organisations. Okay, we'll keep an eye on that story for you from the Middle East, as we always will on Times Radio, and any developments we will bring you them. We can guarantee you of that. We're going to turn our attention to America next, and we'll head to Pennsylvania. Donald Trump is making a speech there. He's holding